Hey everybody, so the debate over Syria has been front and center the last couple of weeks, and I think it's important to break down some of the facts surrounding this debate and, generally speaking, how we think about our foreign policy and America's role in the world. There's a lot of questions we have to ask ourselves. Okay, when is it appropriate for us to use U.S. forces or diplomacy abroad? Is it in the interest of our national security or the security of our allies, and how does their security actually connect to our own security? Good questions to ask. What is the history, right? So what were the results when we did something similar in the past? What were the results of pulling out of Iraq in 2011? What were the results of not engaging in Lebanon after the 1983 attack on the Marine barracks? Was it the rise of Hezbollah, for instance? What were the results? And what's the mission? We always have to ask ourselves that. Is the mission properly defined? Is it prevention? Is it deterrence? Is it defeat? Is it a mix of all three? We got to ask these questions. And then we have to do a cost-benefit ratio, and that's always appropriate. You know, two things can be true at once. We can look around the world and we can say, you know what? We're engaged in too many places. Our troops are spread too thin. Our resources are spread too thin. We have to look at every single situation and ask those questions. And it can also be true that pulling back just because it might make us feel good and just wasn't the right decision. So let's dig into that, and let's dig into this specifically with respect to Syria. Okay, so let's go on quickly to some of the details with respect to what just happened in Syria and why we're there in the first place. Okay, on a very basic level, we were there in the first place because we were there to defeat ISIS. We were there to prevent the resurgence of ISIS. Okay, remember, when we're asking what our mission was, well, that's it. Prevent the resurgence of ISIS. Okay, that's important. Okay, but how do we get there? Well, we got there because after we left Iraq in 2011 and a Syrian civil war broke out for both political and ideological reasons, ISIS emerged. Okay, this Islamic caliphate that is, half governing body and half terrorist organization. It was utterly reprehensible. So we had to go back to Iraq, defend our Iraqi allies, and then partner with the Kurds to drive ISIS out of Syria. Now, we never really finished that job. We defeated them territorially, right? They never had an operational stronghold after President Trump was done with them, but they still operated as an insurgency. They're still around, tens of thousands of fighters. And there's a very precarious but almost stable situation, at least a couple weeks ago there was. Okay, the Turks never liked this. The Turks don't like the Kurds, all right? They believe the Kurds are a threat to them, all right? And the Kurds happen to be who we align with. Okay, so that has always created a problem between the U.S. and Turkey. Eventually, Turkey said, you know what? We're coming in. We want to come and create this security zone. Here's the problem. Instead of telling them no, and instead of, I think, working with them on how to alleviate their security concerns, we simply said fine, and we pulled our troops back. Very few troops, by the way. We only had about 1,000 people there. So if we're talking about costs and what we're expending as far as resources to gain the stability and preventive measures against ISIS, we had a very, very small presence and a very, very small cost. So let's address some of the counterpoints specifically. Let's try the "No More Endless Wars" slogan, okay? And that's just what it is. It's a slogan. It makes us feel good, okay? I think it makes us feel morally righteous if we say that we're against warfare. Of course we're against warfare, all right? But here's the thing to remember. We can want to end a war. It does not mean our enemies will want to end that same war, okay? They get a say also, and they know that. All right, think about what the Taliban have always said. They say that we have the watches, but they have the time. Meaning we have all the technology, we have all the resources, but they have time because they know that we are fickle, and they know that we get frustrated, right, with these so-called endless wars. Here's what you have to remember. We can't put artificial timetables and troop levels on a mission. In the end, we have a mission, and that mission, as I've stated, is prevention. It's deterrence. It's an understanding that this world is a very small place. Information travels very fast. It's easy for our enemies to radicalize people here at home. And it's also easy for them to establish plans to attack the homeland when we leave them alone. They wake up every single day and they think about how are they going to conduct another 9/11. I promise you that. I've met these people. I know them. I've targeted them. They think about this every day. It's one of their biggest missions. So just remember that. We can say no more wars, but they don't have to. Point number 2 that we hear a lot, bring the troops home. Okay, this one's pretty personal for me because I was one of those troops, and it's a little difficult for me to understand because myself and a lot of my friends, we understood why we were there. Okay, we understood that this enemy is always dreaming about killing us, and that was important for us to fight them over there so that they don't have the operational space and the luxury of planning their attacks back on the homeland. We knew why we were going overseas. It's also important to put some of this into context. Okay, there's 35,000 troops in Germany, there's 50,000 troops in Japan, there's 30,000 troops in South Korea. I don't hear any calls to bring all of them home. I mean, maybe we should consider that. It's not out of the question. We should be tying the number of our troops and the resources we're expending on the actual mission. When we look at Syria, we only had 1,000 troops there, mostly special operations forces. Pretty low cost, almost no resources being spent. But we had a huge benefit from that. Okay, we were deterring the resurgence of ISIS. We were emboldening our allies, the Kurds, to continue the fight against ISIS for us, and we had some semblance of stability. We're talking about cost benefit, that's a pretty good cost benefit ratio there. And also, I'd have to question, if we're so concerned about bringing a select few troops home from one place, why does nobody raise any flags when we're talking about putting 2,000 more troops in Saudi Arabia to deter the Iranian threat? Again, where's the consistency? ISIS has been defeated, so why are we there at all? Okay, well, that's an easy one to debunk. They're not defeated. We know that after this week because they've been conducting attacks. Like I said, ISIS is an insurgency now. They're not an Islamic caliphate. They're not as powerful as they once were, but they do have the ability to recruit, and they do have the ability to regain strength if we let them. And our worry now is that we're letting them. Next point. We're not the world's policemen, so why are we out there with our troops? Okay, this is a bit of a dishonest talking point, and it doesn't really represent what we're actually doing at all. Okay, we're not out there as a police force alone, enforcing some semblance of international law. That's not at all what we're doing. We're partnering with allies, and we're doing so because it serves our national security interests. And again, every situation is different, and we analyze it as such. This gets to another point. Alliances are important. Okay, they're very important. They're a force multiplier. In special operations, we're in a lot of countries, almost 150 of them. We're not just fighting wars out there. We're not policing anything. We are uplifting our allies. We're training them. We're working with them. They are our force multipliers. Okay, you don't maintain an alliance with a pen pal relationship. You have to work with them. We do exercises together. We train together, all right, so that when something bad happens, they can do it, and then we can support them if needed, all right, because it's in our national security interest to have a global world order that is good and stable. This gets to another question about alliances. I mean, do we owe the Kurds anything? That's the other question that's always asked. And, well, first, I guess I should lay out the facts. Okay, they've been our allies for a while. In Iraq, in Syria, they've been very good allies. They were by far the best fighters against ISIS, by far. All right, my friends were working with them directly. They lost about 11,000 people fighting ISIS, and probably far more displaced, and right now being displaced because of Turkey as well. All right, we lost 8 troops during the fight in Syria against ISIS, which is heartbreaking. I know some of these people, all right? I've contacted their families, and it's tragic. And it's a moral question. Do we owe the Kurds anything after we fought next to them? I mean, if you say no, you say no. But I'm not sure how we can say no. I'm not sure how we can look ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, we fought by your side, and now we're gonna let you get steamrolled by Turkey. I'm honestly not sure if that's a good moral answer. And it's just something that we have to ask ourselves honestly. Last point, Turkey was going to invade no matter what, and it just made more practical sense to remove our troops. Okay, well, this is probably the best argument that the White House could make for its decision. The problem is I think it's a false choice. I don't think we have this choice just between going to war with Turkey and pulling our troops out. I think we simply could have said, hey, don't invade right past our troops. You're going to put our troops in harm's way, and if you do that, we're not going to tolerate it. Right? We are the United States of America. We're not just some country. We're the greatest, mightiest military force that has ever existed. And Turkey is a supposed NATO ally. They should listen, but we never asked them to listen, and that's the problem. All right, so what you just heard is a lot of complexity. All right, it's a difficult situation, and there's honest debate to be had. But we need to operate with facts and history and not just slogans, not emotions. And unfortunately, that's been a lot of what I've seen as far as how this debate goes. So I've laid out some complexities for you and some questions to really ask yourself when you're trying to figure out where you stand on this. Again, two things can be true at once. You can think that we're involved in too many situations around the world, but it can also be true that this was the wrong thing to pull our troops back from. All right? And that's my honest disagreement with the president. Overall, the president's foreign policy has actually found that really good balance between nation building on one extreme and pulling out entirely on the other. Again, what did we see happen in 2011 in Iraq? It was an absolute disaster when we left a vacuum of power. But it also wasn't so great having hundreds of thousands of troops deployed, okay? That was frustrating. We were spending a lot of money. We were losing a lot of people. I get that. But what we have now is an actual balance, and it was important to maintain that balance where the mission is clear. And that mission was prevention of the resurgence of ISIS and prevention of more terrorist attacks on the homeland, because I promise you, this enemy thinks about doing that every single day. Thanks.